In Gidan Ura, power was not a quiet thing. It was a physical weight, a clamor that shook the dust from the thatched roofs. The villagers believed that if a man was silent, he was a ghost, and ghosts do not inherit the earth. Sani was the village head's only son, and he was a man built of echoes. From the moment he could walk, his father, a man with a voice like grinding stones, had taught him the geography of dominance. A lion does not whisper to the grass, his father would say, striking a servant for a minor slowness. Sani learned that to be respected was to be loud. By 25, Sani was the loudest man in the province. In the market, his laughter arrived minutes before his body. He wore robes of heavy embroidered damask that stiffened his posture, the fabric rasping like a thread with every step. He pushed through crowds because he liked the way people stumbled to make way. He insulted the blacksmith's work and took what he wanted from the stalls without paying, calling it a son's tax. The villagers smiled at him, but the smiles never reached their eyes. They were brittle masks held up by the fear of his father's influence. Sani saw these marks and mistook them for mirrors. He believed he was loved because he was feared, but the blood of fear and the blood of respect are two different colors. Behind the high mud walls of his compound, the theater ended. The noise died in his throat. His footsteps, usually heavy and rhythmic, became soft, almost apologetic. He would find his wife, Ladi, sitting in the courtyard, her presence a pool of still water that Sani's loudness could never ripple. Ladi was a woman forged in silence. Years prior, when a powerful man had stolen her dignity, the village did not sharpen their spears. Instead, the elders visited her mother's hut with hushed warnings. A woman is like a clay pot, once cracked. The water is gone. Keep your silence, and the village will keep its peace. Ladi did not cry. She realized that Gidan Ura was a place where men's sins were washed away by their titles. She moved into Sani's compound like a Trojan horse, her mind a fortress. On their first night, Sani entered with his usual swagger. Ladi did not bow. She walked like a king outside. She said, her voice a low melodic vibration that cut through his performance. But I see the way your hands shake when the wind catches the door. You are just a boy trying to outrun his father's shadow. The armor of his arrogance didn't just crack, it vanished. From that night on, Ladi's silence became a vacuum that sucked air out of his lungs. Fear is an uncomfortable tenant. Sani chose to evict it by force. The wedding night killings began when the Harmattan wind was at its sharpest, biting through the heavy damask of Sani's pride. Since the night Ladi had called him a boy in a shadow, Sani had felt hollow. When he walked the village, the air felt too thin. He needed to feel heavy again. The first was Binta on her wedding night, as she waited for a husband who was delayed by a broken cat. Sani slipped into the shadows of her hut. He didn't want her gold or her beauty. He wanted the moment the light in a person's eyes turned into a scream they couldn't utter. When his hands closed around her throat, the world finally went quiet in a way that he controlled. For those few minutes, he wasn't the man whose wife looked through him. He was the god of the end. He became a student of the village cracks. He didn't hunt the daughters of the wealthy. He hunted the unnoticed. The girls whose absence would be blamed on spirit, or wandering, or bad luck. Each death was a brick he laid to rebuild his crumbling internal palace. He would return home, the iron smell of blood hidden under the scent of expensive frankincense, and look at Ladi's closed door. I am the sun, he would whisper to the dark. I am the lion. Fear is never satisfied. Only Aisha, the water girl, noticed the rhythm. She fetched water when others slept. She moved unnoticed. On wedding nights, she saw a tall figure leaving the same compound again and again. The fourth time, moonlight revealed his face. Sani. Aisha's stomach folded in on itself. She tried to speak once, but her mother silenced her with a slap born of terror, not cruelty. Power eats truth, her mother said, and it never leaves bones behind. Aisha carried the secret like a sickness. She avoided paths. She prayed for brides she could not won. She looked at Sani and lowered her eyes. The air in the village head's inner chamber was thick, smelling of old leather and the sour breath of a man who had outlived his own mercy. Sani stood in the corner, his robes rustling, a frantic dry sound. His father, the old lion, did not look at him. He looked only at Jibril, who was sitting on the floor, tracing patterns in the dust. Do you know why the walls of this palace are so thick, Jibril? The father asked. His voice was a low vibration that seemed to come from the earth itself. Jibril shook his head, his eyes fixed on his father's feet. No, Baba. To keep the shame from leaking out, the father whispered. He finally turned his gaze to Sani, a look of cold clinical evaluation. I have heard the whispers. A tall man, a man with the stride of a prince. They don't say your name yet, Sani, but they are harmed against the teeth. Sani's knees buckled slightly. Father, Quiet! The old lion didn't shout. The world was ablaze. He turned back to Jibril. He reached out a hand surprisingly gentle and lifted Jibril's chin. You have always been my quiet one. You are the water that flows under the grass. No one expects anything of you. Because of that, you are the only one who can save us. Save us? Jibril's voice was a small, hopeful bird. The village needs a sacrifice to stop the fear, the father said, his thumb stroking Jibril's jawline like a butcher checking the bone. If Sani falls, the lineage is cut. The fields will be taken. Your mother will be cast out. But you, if you are touched by the spirit, if you are the one who took the girls because the king told you to, the village will pity us. They will say the father is brave for giving up his own blood to the law. Sani watched, a sickening relief washing over him as he realized his father was pitching a sail. Jibril, Sani stepped forward, his voice oily with false grief. Think of the family name. I'll make sure you are fed. I'll make sure no one touches you in the cell. You'll be a hero in secret. The father stood up, towering over the kneeling boy. The choice is simple. Jibril, be a man who destroyed his father's house by speaking the truth, or be the son who saved it by wearing a lie. Which one has more weight? Jibril looked at Sani, searching for a spark of the brother who used to carry him on his shoulders. He found only a void wrapped in silk. I will be the son you need, Jibril whispered. The father nodded. The deal closed. He looked at Sani with a flash of pure, unadulterated loathing. Get the guards. And Sani tried to cry. It is the only thing your voice is good for now. The moon was a thin silver, and the air smelled of damp earth and the sharp medicinal tang of neem leaves. Aisha reached the river bank, her breath coming in shallow hitches. She dropped her guard. The hollow tug sounded like a heartbeat against the sand. She wasn't alone. Ladi was there, standing by the water's edge. Her figure as still and dark as a basalt statue. She wasn't fetching water. Her hands were empty, hanging loosely at her sides. You saw him, didn't you? Ladi's voice didn't startle Aisha. It felt like a thought the girl had already been having. Aisha froze, her fingers digging into the rough bark of the baobab tree. The water, it wouldn't stay clear, the girl whispered, her voice trembling. It kept turning, even when he scrubbed until his skin was raw. Ladi turned slowly. In the moonlight, her eyes looked like two obsidian stones. She has been scrubbing for years. Aisha long before the first girl was found. He thinks if he is loud enough, the world won't hear the sound of his own wrath. Aisha stepped out from the shadows, her eyes wet. My mother says power eats the truth. She says if I speak, the sand will swallow us both. But Jibril is kind. He shares his grain with the strays. He is not the one. Jibril is the lamb they have chosen because he does not know how to bite, Ladi said, her voice hardening into a blade. She walked towards Aisha and placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. It wasn't a soft touch. It was a grounding weight. Your mother is right. Power eats the truth. But silence is what digests it. Ladi leaned in closer. The scent of her wood smoke perfumed her, filling Aisha's senses. The men in the square think they are the only ones who know the geography of this village. They think because we carry the water and stir the pots, we do not see where the blood is spilled. What do we do? Aisha asked, her voice a tiny fracture in the night. Ladi looked back towards the high mud walls of the palace, where a single torch flickered in Sani's window. We do not shout. A shout can be silenced with a hand over the mouth. We whisper. We whisper until the wind itself is carrying the name of the killer, and there are no more hands left to cover the truth. Ladi reached into the folds of her wrapper and pulled out a small heavy object, a silver ring with the village head's crest, stained with a dark dried crust. Sani had lost it during his hunt near the river. Take your water, Aisha, Ladi said, handing her the ring. Tomorrow you will find this near the place where Binta died. You will not give it to the elders. You will give it to the blacksmith's wife. Then you will wait for the noise to start. The morning sun beat down on the Gidankura market, a cacophony of hawkers' cries, bargaining voices, and the rhythmic clank of the blacksmith's hammer. Aisha, her water pot balanced on her head, moved with a newfound lightness. She had already delivered the small silver ring to the blacksmith's wife, Inna Kande, whose face had gone ashen with grim understanding. Inna Kande was a woman built of quiet strength, her hands calloused not just from the forge, but from the years of holding her tongue. She wore no expensive robes, owned no titles, but her eyes missed nothing. She had known Binta, the first bride, had even helped her weave her bridal scarf. Today, Inna Kande did not attend to her husband's stall. She sat on a low stool by the wall, directly opposite the main square where Sani often held court with his boisterous laughter. She held the small tarnished silver ring in her palm openly. A group of women gathered to draw water, their conversation a low hum. One of them, a woman known for her gossip, leaned in to speak to Inna Kande. Such a sorrow, these killings, Kande. Even the son of the village head searches with all his might. Inna Kande didn't respond immediately. She rotated the ring with her thumb, letting the weak sunlight catch on its crest. Indeed, she said, her voice clear, cutting through the market din just enough for her closest to hear. And such a shame too, for a man so powerful. One would think he would be more careful with his own possessions. She held up the ring. The village head's crest, a stylized lion's head, glinted. A ripple went through the small group of women. One gasped. Another covered her mouth with her hand. This was not just a lost ring. It was the symbol of the ruling house, the very mark that gave Sani his unchallenged arrogance. Where did you find such a thing? Whispered the gossip, her eyes wide. Near Binta's compound, Inna Kande replied, her gaze sweeping over the women, lingering on Aisha, who stood a little distance away, feigning indifference. Just this morning. It seems our great protector was very close to the shadows on the night Binta was taken, perhaps too close. The women dispersed quickly, not with shouts, but with a silent urgency. The whisper started then, like a brush fired through dry grass. The blacksmith's wife had found the ring near Binta's hut on that night. The market noise began to change. The bargaining softened. The laughter died. People stopped haggling and simply looked at each other, their eyes exchanging a terrible dawning understanding. Sani's bellowing laughter from his usual spot near the grain stalls now sounded hollow, an obnoxious distraction. It wasn't a formal accusation. It was worse. It was a seed of doubt planted in the collective consciousness of Gideon Kura. The people didn't need proof. They needed permission to question, and Inna Kande had just given it to them, not with a shout, but with the quiet, devastating truth of a lost object. Sani, oblivious, continued to mock a nervous merchant, but the silence around him grew, a palpable thing, until he finally noticed. The eyes of the villagers weren't on the merchant, they were on him, no longer smiling their brutal mask. They were cold, analytical. The architecture of his noise was beginning to crumble. Sani felt the shift before he understood it. It was like a sudden drop in barometric pressure before the storm. The air in the market became heavy, hard to swallow. He was in the middle of a joke, a cruel, jagged story about a merchant's daughter, and he was waiting for the predictable ripple of sycophantic laughter. But it didn't come. Instead, the silence of the market seemed to rush towards him, a rising tide of wordless judgment. Sani's laughter trailed off into a dry, awkward cough. He adjusted the heavy embroidered collar of his damask robes, the fabric rasping against his neck like a coarse rope. "What is this?" he barked, his voice sounding thin and metallic in the new quiet. "Have you all grown tongues of lead? I ask you a question, old man." The merchant he had been mocking didn't flinch. For the first time in years, the old man looked Sani directly in the eye. It wasn't the look of a subject, it was the look of a man observing a specimen. Slowly, the merchant turned his back and began packing his bolts of cloth, his movements deliberate and calm. Sani's heart hammered against his ribs. He turned in a slow circle, searching for the familiar mirrors, the fearful smiles, the bowed heads, but the marks were gone. He saw a group of women by the wall, their heads huddled together. They weren't whispering anymore. They were just staring. He saw Musa, the head of the guards, standing 10 paces away, his hand resting on the hilt of his spear, his expression unreadable, but his eyes fixed on Sani's hands, the hands that Aisha had seen turning the river rust red. "Why are you looking at me?" Sani shrieked. The lion's roar. He had practiced his whole life cracked, sliding into a frantic high-pitched plea. "I am the son of Gideon Ura. I am the one hunting your monsters." He saw a flicker of movement near the grain stalls. Inna Kande, the blacksmith's wife, was standing there. She didn't say a word, but she raised her hand and pointed, not at his face, but at his chest, where the missing silver ring should have been. The gesture was infectious. One by one, others began to point. No one shouted killer. No one screamed justice. The silence was more terrifying than any accusation. It was the sound of 1,000 people withdrawing their consent. Sani felt a cold, oily sweat break across his forehead. The architecture of noise he had built, the shouting, the insults, the heavy footsteps, had been a wall to keep his own cowardice in. Now the wall was transparent. He felt naked. He felt small. He tried to take a step forward to assert his dominance, but his legs felt like water. He looked at the crowd and saw not a village, but a jury that had already reached its verdict. "Father," he gasped, turning towards the palace walls. His voice finally reduced to the low vibration Ladi had mocked. "Father, tell them." But the palace gates remained shut. The high mud walls offered no echo. For the first time in his life, Sani realized that the loudest man in the province was the only one who couldn't be heard. The sun was dying ember on the horizon when they brought him to the center of the square. Sani's father sat on the high stool, his face a landscape of cracks and shadows. He looked not like a man, but like an ancient mountain presiding over a landslide. Jibril had been released from the cell. He stood behind his father, his eyes no longer wet but hollow, a boy who had seen the bottom of his family's soul and found it empty. The blood has been named, the father said, his voice a ghost of its former thunder. The lie has been stripped, Sani, son of my house. You have traded the lives of our daughters for a noise that was never yours to make. Sani tried to speak, to beg, to use the oily performative grief he had practiced. But as he opened his mouth, the elders did something Sani had never seen. They turned their stools, one by one. They faced the opposite direction, looking at the mud walls of the hut, at the goats, at the darkening sky, anywhere but at him. From this hour, the father continued, his voice flat, you are the wind, you are the dust, you are the silence of a grave that has no stone. The father stood up and walked away. He did not look at Sani as he passed. He walked through him as if Sani were a patch of thin air, the living ghost. Weeks passed. The harmattan returned, blowing cold and dry through the village. Sani sat in the market, his back against a baobab tree. He still wore his heavy damask robes, but they were stained now, the embroidery unraveling like his sanity. He reached out to grab the sleeve of a passing guard. Musa, the man who used to flinch at Sani's shout. Musa didn't pull away. He didn't even acknowledge the touch. He simply kept walking, his arm moving through Sani's grip as if it were a stray branch. Sani screamed. He screamed until his throat felt like it was lined with glass, a raw primal sound that should have shattered the afternoon. A group of children playing nearby didn't even flinch. They continued their game, running through the space inches from Sani's face. To them, the scream was just the wind whistling through the thatch. He was a man built of echoes, but the world had stopped echoing. At the edge of the village, Ladi stood with Aisha and her mother. They had their belongings packed in simple woven baskets. No one had stopped them. In a village of men who used noise to hide their sins, they had found the exit in the silence. Ladi looked back one last time. She saw a lone figure in tattered silk standing in the center of the square, waving his arms at a crowd that was busy buying grain, laughing at jokes he couldn't hear, and living lives he was no longer a part of. Is he dead, Ladi? Aisha asked softly, looking at the pathetic figure. Worse, Ladi replied, adjusting the strap of her bag. He is finally quiet. They turned away from Gidan Kura. Behind them, the village was peaceful. The architecture of noise had been dismantled, and its peace was a silence that finally had room for the truth. But the truth had already been whispered. In the village square, the trial was the quietest day in history. Sani was tied to the central tree. He screamed, I was afraid. I wanted to be big, but his voice no longer had weight. The elders did not kill him. They enacted the exclusion. They turned his tools away, one by one. They looked at the sky, the goats, the mud, anywhere but him. Sani was returned to the world, but he was a ghost. When he walked through the market, people looked through him. When he screamed until his throat felt like glass, children played through the sounds as if it were only the wind. He was a man built of echoes, but the world had stopped echoing. Ladi left the village that evening, taking Aisha with her. As they walked towards the sunset, Gidan Kura shrank behind them. Is he dead? Aisha asked. Worse, Ladi replied. He is finally quiet.